Hi, this is Dr. Jeffrey Moss, and I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Moss Minutes. And today I want to talk about a very interesting study that was recently performed and reported upon. And when I say recently, the report I'm looking at comes from, it's June 5th of this year. And it involved a study. This is reported at the American Society of Clinical Oncology annual meeting. And it was a study that was done on hot flashes, and specifically looking at the idea that flaxseed can reduce hot flashes. And the soundbite, the title, of course, says it didn't work. Surprising result in flaxseed for hot flashes study. Surprising in the sense that previous studies had suggested it did work, but surprise, it didn't work this time. However, when you read how the study was conducted, maybe there's a little bit more to it than the soundbite that we're seeing here. We see on the internet, we see on the 6 o'clock news that, it doesn't work, throughout the whole idea. The study, what it did, it looked at 188 women, and they received either a bar, a fiber bar containing flaxseed, specifically 410 milligrams of lignans, which come from flaxseed, or a placebo fiber bar. Now, interestingly enough, both of them worked. That's what it says. After 6 weeks, mean hot flash scores were reduced by 4.9 units in the flaxseed group and by 3.5 units in the placebo group. However, statistically, it wasn't significant. Therefore, again, by conventional research model, we have to throw it out. Didn't work because it didn't do better than placebo. But listen to this. In both groups, a little over a third of the women experienced a 50% reduction in their hot flash scores. That seems pretty good. But what's the problem here? And this gets to the whole issue of the placebo model. Now, the classic idea of a placebo is that it's supposed to rule out the idea that something worked because people believe it's going to work. The placebo, the idea is that it's really chemically worthless. It's inert. Doesn't do anything, but it worked because people believed it was going to work. Now, there's a problem with that, as we're finding out. Number one, can you truly create an inert, worthless placebo? By today's biochemical standards, it's very difficult. In fact, the placebo here was loaded with fiber. Not flax fiber, but it had fiber in it. Is that worthless? I think we know as nutritionists, we really can't conclude that for sure, can we? But again, this whole idea of that we basically look at this concept that it worked because people believed it was going to work as a negative thing. And that's that's the whole model, the placebo-controlled model. That if something does not show statistically better results than this worthless thing, it too is worthless. Well, it's not what we currently know from a scientific, metabolic, clinical standpoint. This is dated thinking. And I realize this is how you get papers published, but this isn't the real world of today's science and today's clinical practice. The fact remains is the truth about this paper is that we had, and it's like a glass half full type of thing, we had two therapies that seemed to work equally as well. Why didn't the soundbite say that? We had a placebo, which may or may not have been a true placebo, in other words, biochemically inert, a bar without flax but had lots of fiber. That worked. And we had a bar that had fiber plus some flaxseed. That worked a little bit better. We had two. Now, we don't know why specifically, these specific biochemical parameters of the placebo bar. Did it work because of the fiber? Did it work because people believed it was going to work? Or a little of both? We don't know. But the fact we don't know, does it make it worthless? Does the fact that the flaxseed bar worked just a little bit better than the placebo bar, does that make it worthless too? It's a different way of looking at it. And by extension, I think we have to take a look at a lot of these quote-unquote negative studies when we find out, as the majority are, they were ruled negative because they didn't perform a whole lot better than a placebo. In those cases, maybe we have to really conclude that we have two equally efficacious therapies, and one maybe was a little bit better than the other. And so now, instead of saying we have basically, we're nowhere, we have worthless information, maybe we could say glass half full. We've now learned about two fairly beneficial approaches to a healthcare issue. Something to think about. This is Dr. Jeffrey Moss. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of Moss Minutes. Looking forward to talking to you next time.